in addition to the federal required entrance and exit counseling. We also encourage students to consider borrowing, I think, what is called a rule of thumb, no more than what they could potentially earn in their first year out of school. So for a lot of students, that generates a conversation around how much am I going to borrow over 4 years? And is that number in line with what I anticipate to make? And so just in terms of getting them to start thinking about 4 years and not just that first year that they're looking to pay for their tuition costs, right? Finally, not finally, but additionally, we are in our 4th year of using an online financial literacy class that we require all students that are borrowing private loans to complete. We do this prior to the certification, or at least prior to the loan being credited to that student's bill. The online piece, again, similar in lines with the federal entrance counseling, maybe takes 15 minutes of their time, but I think it's important that they understand you know, that they're borrowing a loan and that mom and dad just aren't co-signing a loan for them, right? We haven't necessarily seen that that this program requiring students to do the private loan counseling has reduced the loan borrowing, but we haven't seen our loans increase either over the last 5 years. So our net totals have remained the same, even with tuition increases. And then we also have partnered with ASA to implement SALT, which I think here in Boston, a lot of people understand this financial literacy piece that ASA provides online. In addition, they can provide our students with direct counseling, so a toll-free call-in center that all of our students have access to, and outreach, so mailing, emailing, students that are in those early stages of delinquency, so hopefully reaching them before they get to a default status, right, or a late-stage delinquency. And finally, we use the SALT program to implement a peer-to-peer program. So what we have done is used a SALT ambassador. Since this is our first full 4 years, I've had one student these 4 years. Her name is Tatiana Andrade, and she's done such a wonderful job for us. She's able to make presentations to her fellow students in their dorms, in classrooms. She's just been really an invaluable asset, and I think that the peer-to-peer program in general is just an important component in getting students to understand financial literacy and start having that conversation. So with that, I would love to just pass it on to our state senator.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eric, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and you know, it's a very, very important topic to all of us, I know, here in the room, and certainly to us in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I know you heard from one of my colleagues earlier this afternoon, Representative Paul Marks, and Representative Marks and I had the opportunity, the task, if you will, of chairing a special Commission on Student Debt and Loan. This was 2 years ago. And in connection with that, we held hearings throughout the Commonwealth, and we went to colleges and universities, private, public. We heard from students, we heard from parents, we heard from folks who work in financial aid, like some of my colleagues up here today. And it was a fascinating study because first and foremost, we completely understand this student debt program and what can we as policymakers do to try and address it. It's not an easy answer. As all of you know, I was speaking with my general counsel earlier this afternoon, and she mentioned a phrase which I hadn't heard, so I'm going to use it here. You know, there isn't a silver bullet, but maybe there's silver buckshot to address this problem. And so as we approached it, we did make a report, and I think we have it in access online. I don't have any fancy PowerPoint, but I'm just going to touch on a couple of things here that were part of the recommendation that we came to after conducting the months of hearings. Some of the things that, as a policymaker, legislation that I filed, some that has become law, I'm happy to say, not all of it. And so I thought, you know, you're the experts, many of you here in the room who know what you're doing in your institutions, but as a lawmaker and as a policymaker, I thought I'd touch on some of the issues that were important that as far as dealing with student debt. So one of the first things I wanted to mention was the 529 plan. Many of you are, I'm sure, quite familiar with 529 plan, but until just a few months ago, we did not have that in Massachusetts. We are one of the few states, I think 34 states have it, Massachusetts did not. And I had filed a bill called an Act Building Real Incentives for College Savings, the BRICS program. You know, beginning in 2017, this will be available to Massachusetts residents. The deduction will be $1,000 for an individual, $2,000 for a married couple. And I think it's something that we had seen in our studies, in our research, that it really does make a difference. Here in Massachusetts, what we know, the student debt is ballooning out of control. In Massachusetts, the average student graduated with owing, in Massachusetts, over $29,000. And so the incentivizing of savings before you get to that point is key. And one of the examples I'd like to use, and one that I think drives home the point, this was something that the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority illustrates. You know, a family who invested $6,906 in a 529 plan, after 10 years, that was worth $10,000. Another family did not save anything in a college plan, and so when it came time for their child to go to school, they took out a $10,000 loan. The cost to repay, $13,920. So compared to family one and family two, the second family spent more than $7,014, which is more than they invested in the first place. So this really makes a difference. And we also were keenly aware that the vast majority, over 72% of those taking advantage of 529 plans, earn incomes of $150,000 or less a year. And so it's certainly, it may sound like a lot of money, but for a family of 4 or more, to cover mortgage, living expenses, and college costs, it's simply not enough. So this we saw as a solid middle-class assistance for families in saving for college, and it also gets, you know, families who maybe make too much to be eligible for financial aid, but give them that incentive to save, starting when the kids are young as well. So that was signed into law as part of the Economic Development Bill, and I think I'll mention one other thing. I do have the privilege of co-chairing as the Senate co-chair of the Committee on Higher Education, but I chair the Committee on Economic Development and Emerging Technologies, and I mention that because it is abundantly clear to us that we need to educate more, not less, students here in Massachusetts. We have a lot of outstanding colleges and universities, but the economists tell us clearly the jobs of the future, we are not going to be able to keep pace with the number of college-educated individuals are required to fill the jobs that are coming and that will be here in Massachusetts. So it's so important to get kids the opportunity to go to school, and yet at the same time get them out of school without having a crushing debt load. And so it's not just for the higher ed committee that this is important. Economic development, it's as important, if not more. And so that became part of not a higher education bill, but the economic development bill that the governor signed in August of this year. Another area that is important, and I think this was mentioned here, and that is employee student loan assistance. You know, the tax code offers additional opportunities for combating student debt crisis. One of them, the employer loan repayment that was discussed earlier today. And the data here had suggested to us that employees who are starting to view loan repayment programs, they look at that as a valuable workplace decision where they would like to work. And despite the high level of interest, you know, one survey that was done by ASA in 2015 showed 76% of those answering the survey said if there was an employee loan assistance program, that would factor in very favorably for them to choose that work. But despite the level of interest, a high level of interest from prospective employees, only 3% of employers offer the program, and state government, we believe, can help to increase that. So currently, when employees receive the loan repayment assistance from their employers, it's considered taxable income. And so, you know, though it's nice that they are getting the assistance from their employer, it's also adding to the income, and it's when they're struggling with other payments, including their student loan debt, it's a challenge. I did file a bill that this past session that would allow employees to deduct up to $3,600 in employer loan repayments from their state taxable income. A similar bill was filed in Congress last year as well. And I hope this type of legislation, both on the state level and the federal level, will not only encourage more employers to offer loan assistance repayment, but also help the employees in terms of, again, managing their expenses, managing the debt load. So that was one other piece of legislation that came out of the hearings that we did. Another area that I wanted to touch on, and that is investment in public higher education. You know, Massachusetts and other states can have the biggest impact on college affordability through budgets. And the strongest predictor of tuition and fee increases is the change in revenue appropriations that the state gives to public education. And so we had extreme cuts in Massachusetts over the past 10 years. We started rebuilding back, but we're still not back to where we were pre-recession. And so it improved somewhat, but in fiscal year 14, we had an arrangement with UMass, which was called 50-50. And that was, the term 50-50 partnership referred to the goal of returning to where students in the state provided equal shares of the funding. And this was an important way to hold the line on increased tuition and fees. In return, the UMass system agreed not to increase tuition or fees for those the 2-year period that the 50-50 partnership was in existence. Unfortunately, it's not currently in existence. And so it lasted 2 years. They held the line on costs. I think students benefited, families benefited, but right now I'm recommending that we continue to readopt the 50-50 program, again, to put together funding that is necessary for public education. Another area that needs funding, and it oftentimes, as we know, since that's what we're talking about, is what we have here in Massachusetts, the Mass Grant and state scholarships. So the Mass Grant, the state-based financial aid, represents another opportunity that the state, we as lawmakers have for increasing affordability, especially when it comes to low-income students. Mass Grant is the state's primary source of need-based financial aid, and it provides assistance to undergraduate students who reside in Massachusetts or who are enrolled in any approved public or independent college, university, school of nursing, or any other institution of higher education. Now, this is a statistic that I'm not proud of, but I'm going to share it with you. In 1988, Mass Grant covered 80% of tuition and fees at public colleges and universities for eligible students. Today, it covers about 9%, with the average award today of $657. Now, you all know that doesn't go very far in today's education world. As of 2012, and this is the part that I'm not proud of, but I will share because I want to see it change, Massachusetts ranked 46th out of 48 states and territories with need-based aid programs. Only Arkansas and Puerto Rico fared worse than Massachusetts in terms of the average need-based grant award to students. I recommended increasing the Mass Grant funding to support the Commonwealth students who have the most needs. Specifically, I support increasing the state financial aid line item to $100 million, which would increase the Mass Grant Scholarship Reserve to $39 million. So eventually, the Mass Grant Award should cover about as much of the tuition and fees as it did in 1988. That should be our goal. Also, another area that the state has a role to play in terms of financial aid to students has to do with the merit-based scholarship program, which is known as the John and Abigail Adams Scholarship. And this could also be a more effective tool than it is right now in reducing debt and attracting the top talent of students to Massachusetts public institutions. Only 24% of Massachusetts students who are offered the Adams Scholarship actually take it. Why? Because the Adams Scholarship merely provides tuition waiver, not a waiver for fees, which comprise the majority of the costs of attending a public college or university. I filed legislation this term that changes the parameters of the Adams Scholarship so that it covers both tuition and fees. The bill also heightens academic requirements for eligibility. The scholarship currently costs about $14 million, but because it's a tuition waiver, there's no corresponding budgetary appropriation. So state scholarship and financial aid is clearly important. I think we can do a better job by retooling this particular merit-based scholarship. Another thing that state scholarship and financial aid can be used for is a tool for accountability. Too many schools are taking state aid and then failing to deliver adequate educational programs to their students. I know there's no one in this room, but we do know there are some schools out there that are doing that. I filed legislation to ensure that schools have more skin in the game by prohibiting schools that are unable to manage loan default rates and graduation rates from receiving state aid, because it's a limited resource and there has to be some accountability. So my bill would only allow a school to receive state aid if the school maintains a graduation rate of 30% or more. And two, the school sustains a cohort default rate at or below 20%. Don't worry, Stonehill is not even in or you.
Senator, we actually have to
Wrap up?
Wrap up.
Okay. Just one last shout out, and that has to do with, I love the shopping sheet. I filed legislation for that. I think that's a great thing. And then two other things that are very helpful to reducing student debt is dual enrollment program, where students, while they're in high school, can go take classes at the college or community college or universities. Very helpful in reducing student debt. We service a lot of students. We nowhere near have enough funding to do all the students who want to do that, and I support increasing that line item. How'd I do?
Great, you all did great, yeah. Thank you very much. Everyone, let's give a hand for our panelists. We're running slightly behind, but there's probably room for a few questions. Does anyone have anything they wanted to ask? If not, I have one question, but please, anyone else, go ahead. I'm going to ask my question. A lot in my reporting, I talked to first-generation students, and a lot of what I hear from them is that they just had no idea how to go about the college admissions process, nevertheless, financial aid. And so I'm wondering if there is any additional outreach or more proactive outreach or anything in that area to students who might need extra help because they're the first person in their family to go to college.
I think that here in Massachusetts, we do a really good job of providing some of those services. ASA would probably tell you that their partnership with the Boston Public Library provides a lot of those services. Could we do more? Absolutely. My job really is to counsel those families while they're on our campus, you know, during visits and prior to making the decision to attend Stonehill College. So I find that for me personally, meeting with the student is really where we get in touch with them and lead them through that process.
Thank you, and I think, you know, I represent the city of Lowell, which has a large immigrant population, and it is a huge issue trying to get families understanding about filling out the FAFSA form, for instance. When I was mayor many years ago, there was a student who was accepted at so many schools, Boston College. Now, this family had never filled out the FAFSA, never got any financial aid, could not go that year, but was able to go the next year. But so working with the high schools, especially outreach to the families, has been effective. Working with community organizations that have direct contact with the families, and sometimes it's grandparents raising first-generation students. So there's different avenues than the traditional, but I think we need to do that on a grassroots level so that they are well aware long before that date for the application for financial aid and long before the date for applying for colleges is due.
Yeah.
And I will just comment on our support services, if you will. We provide a high-tech, high-touch service to students, right? So again, exclusively online, students in all 50 states. There's no face-to-face meetings. There's emails, there's and technology, some tools that students can use, voice-to-voice conversations. So we have extended hours of service. Beyond financial aid and IT service desk, we have student support services. You know, we serve a population of students where 71% are classified as underserved in at least one of the following categories. First-generation college student, 40%. And remember, the average age of our student is 35 years old. And you know why they're going back to school? So they can prove to their kids that if I can do it, you can do it. So they really set the example for their own children, and it's very rewarding to go to graduation and see those kinds of presentations from our graduates and the struggles they had to go through to get there. So that's kind of where we sit.
Great, thank you. Everyone's going to be up here afterwards, so I would encourage you to come and ask them more questions after we're done. But with that, we are finished. Give them another. Oh, we have a question. Two questions. Great.
Thank you. Sorry to hold up everybody. So Reggie Jean with NEOA and Upward Bound at Boston University. So I have a couple of questions. So in terms of the policies that WGU adopted, you gave the impression that other colleges were not as encouraged to adopt those. So what do you think? Why do you think that's the case? And do you think more colleges will adopt some of those policies? And then the second question is regarding renewal FAFSAs. So when students are on campus, once they matriculate and the second year they do the renewal FAFSA, how does the school approach Stonehill as well? How do you approach helping students do the renewal FAFSA? Do they see the financial aid office as a resource to help them through that process?
I'll take the first one if you want to help me, Eric, on a second. So the experimental sites are waivers. An institution has to express an interest. You can go to ifap.ed.gov, check them out. read what the program's about. You can customize them to your institution. You know, the two that I presented, the unequal loan disbursements, well, that's sunset. That can't do that anymore. But the limiting unsub loans, certainly all schools should look at doing that if they want to make a difference in certain situations and based on their student demographics, right? So with respect to the, I'm in a very fortunate position where our direct cost of education is less than the annual loan limit. I can recommend they borrow less than the annual amount. Now, not every institution is afforded that opportunity, but I'm happy to hear my colleagues here do not offer plus loans or package plus loans and up to cost of attendance. I mean, that's you know, we talked about, you know, the unsubsidized loans and the capitalized interest, but these are folks that are parents that are closer to retirement than the students are, and that's a real concern, I think. With respect to renewal FAFSA, we don't have a priority deadline for, it's, you know, the students are, it's a continuous enrollment year-round, so we don't have a priority deadline for when to file, but Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I think, I guess, in terms of the renewal FAFSA, it's probably a challenge for all schools, but certainly what we have you know, tried to do is outreach our students early and often. So we're working on just emailing them consistently, typically weekly, to ensure that they get those FAFSAs filed. I know with the prior year, and again, I specifically work with student loans, and so I'm not a financial aid counselor, but I know that they've been working diligently to make sure our returning students know to file now in October to get that FAFSA on file, right? So, I mean, I think it's just diligence, you know, really just providing the communications to our students over the summer to ensure that they file on time.
Yeah, was there another question?
I have a final question. I'm Jean Lucenti Cole from American Student Assistance, and my question, I'm going to ask each panelist to do this because our summit is on solutions for student debt. So if you could ask us as professionals and interested parties, give us advice or your request for one action we can take towards a solution. So you must have a favorite that you could ask of us. So I'm going to ask each panelist to say what they think we could go forth and do.
I think the counseling you do, the, you know, mobile going on location is so important. Bringing all of those resources to people in need who need that is critically important. It's hard to pick one. I mean, the financial literacy piece is huge because I can't tell you how many students who were in trouble testified, I had no idea what I was signing up for. I had no idea what this loan was or that loan was. And unfortunately, they got stopped in their tracks their second or their third year for one reason or another, and now they had the debt and no, you know, degree. So I think the more counseling on the front end that you do, the better. I mean, it just makes a huge difference because as we've heard from the experts, when people are counseled and they understand, they take out less debt in a majority of the cases, so.
Yeah. I would absolutely agree with that. In fact, I was thinking about this yesterday because I don't think that there is one answer to this problem, but in terms of one change that I would like to see, it would be a change in how we exit students. So I think that part of the disconnect is that they just don't understand what loans they have, and so part of the education process is to help them to have that knowledge, right? And so additionally, I think we can strengthen the way that we enter repayment from the grace periods from these loans, because I think that although the 6-month grace period is an awesome thing to have when you don't have a job and you're just coming out of school, I think that there's a disconnect between the student and that repayment date. that needs to be strengthened somewhere along the way in that 6 months.
Thank you. As a financial aid practitioner for many, 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 many years, we can't just sit around and read in the headlines and frighten about the student loan debt crisis, right? I mean, we have to take an action, right? So I appreciate you promoting and advocating some best practices that schools are adopting. Obviously, we've won a couple of national awards. I've been all over the country telling my story. I want people to listen and adopt some, take one kernel of a good idea and take it to your institution. So, you know, the idea is to help students make an informed decision, borrow wisely. I have no pride of ownership. I mean, we're building this loan scenario calculator. When I presented down in Texas, they were like, cool, as soon as you get it done, come on down and present to our commission because we've been working on this for years, and we got to see what you're doing. So I'm willing to share. Give me a shout. Happy to share what we do. So thank you for what you do here.
One real quick question. We haven't really discussed about what efforts colleges are taking to educate the high school levels of students that could possibly be going to your schools or schools around your area. So what efforts are you guys taking as universities at a higher level to come up with curriculums with local high schools in your areas to kind of promote financial literacy before you even get to the point of where you're already borrowing this?
I serve a working adult population, but I'm pleased that the Senator's introduced a 529 savings account. I think you got to start in middle school, the 6th grade. You start early awareness. It's a great program. And I've seen other states make May 29th a celebration. 529.
So I take it your question goes to educating high school students about financial literacy in particular?
In particular, yes.
Yeah.
To get them ready for this next step.
Right.
It's almost inevitable.
So we've had several bills in the legislature as far as establishing financial literacy, and the issue is when do you do that? Is it in junior year in high school? Many feel that's too late because of just the whole idea, not just as to college, actually as to a lot of issues in and around debt and so forth. So there's legislation filed each year. The form has not passed to my satisfaction. We'll continue to file and support that type of legislation. I think that's critical. And then the other aspect that I mentioned is, the dual enrollment program, and that just it gives more of a connection between the college and the high school student. In many of the state schools I know that are participating in the dual enrollment program do have financial counseling on their campus. So the student, while a high school student going and taking 4 credit courses, could also avail him or herself of consulting with the financial aid counselors on that campus. So there's a connection made while they're still in high school.
Anyone else have a question? I don't want to miss anyone. Okay. All right, thank you.